The chatter in the Hartwell mansion's grand ballroom died instantly. You could hear a pin drop in the cavernous space filled with Manhattan's wealthiest and most powerful people. It all began when Grace Morrison's trembling hands sent a crystal wine glass crashing to the marble floor of Manhattan's most exclusive mansion, splattering expensive Bordeaux across Mrs. Becker's $15,000 Valentino gown. She had no idea that this single moment of clumsiness would unravel a secret that had been buried for 19 years. "You useless girl." Patricia Hartwell's voice cut through the silence like a whip, sharp enough to make several guests flinch. "I should have known better than to let you serve at my party." Grace's knees hit the cold marble floor as she frantically tried to clean the spreading crimson stain with her bare hands, her apologies tumbling out in broken whispers. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry. Please, it was an accident. I didn't mean to." Around her, guests whispered and pointed, their laughter barely concealed behind manicured hands and champagne flutes. She could hear every cruel word, each one landing like a physical blow. Orphan girl. Just a housemaid. No breeding at all. What did Patricia expect, hiring charity cases? Before we continue with Grace's story, if you're new to True Spark Stories, welcome to a channel where every story reveals the extraordinary hiding in ordinary lives. While you're here, let us know where you are watching from and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment when lives change forever. Now, let's see how this wine spill will change everything. Now let's dive in. Mama, I told you she would embarrass us. Madison Hartwell's voice dripped with satisfaction as she stood across the ballroom, surrounded by her friends, all of them looking at Grace with identical expressions of disgust. Madison was 23, beautiful in the way that money could buy, and she'd made Grace's life miserable for 3 years. Street rats don't belong around decent people. Grace kept her head down, her eyes burning with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of them. This was her life. 19 years of being reminded she was nothing, nobody, unwanted. She'd been working for the Hartwells for 3 years since Father Thomas at St. Catherine's Church found her the position, enduring their cruelty because she had nowhere else to go. Every day brought new humiliations, but she endured because the alternative was the street. And Grace had spent enough nights shivering in doorways as a child in the foster system to know she'd do almost anything to avoid going back to that life. Mrs. Becker stood up, examining her ruined gown with theatrical horror, her face twisted in disgust. This dress cost $15,000, imported from Milan just last week. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Grace whispered, still scrubbing uselessly at the stain that had already set into the delicate silk. "It was an accident. Please, I didn't mean to." "Accidents are for careless people," Mrs. Becker interrupted coldly, her voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "And careless people shouldn't be allowed to serve in respectable homes." Patricia's face had turned an ugly shade of red. She grabbed Grace by the arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into skin hard enough to leave marks. "Get out of my sight," she hissed, her breath hot with fury and expensive wine. "And you're paying for that dress from your salary, all of it. I don't care if it takes you 3 years. 3 years. Grace's small salary would be gone entirely. She wouldn't be able to save anything for the GED classes she'd been planning to take. Wouldn't be able to send money to Father Thomas's church for the other kids who needed help. Wouldn't be able to buy the used textbooks she studied from in secret, dreaming of one day becoming a teacher. But she didn't protest. She'd learned long ago that protesting only made things worse. Silence was survival. As Grace stumbled toward the kitchen, clutching her throbbing arm where Patricia's nails had broken skin, she didn't notice the tall figure standing near the terrace entrance, watching everything with intense dark eyes. Alexander Kingsley had been observing the party from the periphery, fulfilling a social obligation to family friends. He was 28, heir to the Kingsley Industries empire, and one of New York's most powerful political dynasties. The Kingsley name carried weight equivalent to royalty in Manhattan circles. His great-grandfather had built a fortune in steel, his grandfather in technology, and his father had expanded into media and politics before his death 2 years ago. Alexander had been bored, counting the minutes until he could politely leave, when the crash happened. But something about the young woman's quiet dignity, even as tears streamed down her face, struck something deep within him. The way she'd apologized, not with excuses, but with genuine remorse. The way she'd tried to fix her mistake immediately, even though it was clearly hopeless. The way she'd endured humiliation without fighting back or making a scene. There was a grace in her suffering that felt almost familiar, though he couldn't explain why. He'd seen plenty of service staff at countless functions throughout his life. He'd witnessed mistakes at galas, charity events, political fundraisers. But he'd never seen someone maintain such dignity while being torn apart by cruelty. Most people either crumbled or fought back. This girl did neither. She simply bore it, as if she'd long ago accepted that this was her lot in life. It bothered him more than it should. She bothered him more than she should. Mr. Kingsley. Marcus appeared at his elbow. Marcus had been his chief of staff for 5 years, utterly loyal and discreetly efficient. We should leave. This party is beneath your attention. Alexander nodded slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on the kitchen door where the girl had disappeared, still clutching her injured arm. Marcus, find out who that girl is. Everything about her. But discreetly. I don't want anyone knowing I'm asking. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but knew better than to question his employer when he used that tone. Of course, Mr. Kingsley. As they left the mansion and climbed into the waiting black SUV, Alexander couldn't shake the image of the girl on her knees, apologizing for an accident, accepting blame for a ruined dress she could never afford to replace in 10 lifetimes, carrying herself with more grace than anyone else in that room full of wealthy, educated people who wore their privilege like armor. He didn't know why it mattered. He didn't know why he couldn't stop thinking about her eyes, dark and deep, holding oceans of pain, but no bitterness. He only knew that something about her felt important, like a puzzle piece his soul recognized, even though his mind hadn't seen the full picture yet. The morning sun blazed over Union Square as Grace navigated through the crowded farmers market on Saturday, her small purse containing barely enough for the groceries Patricia demanded. She was mentally calculating prices, trying to figure out how to stretch her meager allowance when angry shouts drew her attention. A cluster of teenage boys surrounded a small homeless child, maybe 7 years old, tossing his dented donation cup between them like a toy. "Give it back," the little boy cried, reaching desperately for the cup as they held it high above his head. "You're begging money?" one of them taunted, shaking the cup so coins rattled inside. "Consider it taxes for using our corner, small fry." The other boys laughed, shoving the child between them like a pinball. He was so small, his clothes torn and dirty, his eyes filling with tears of frustration and fear that twisted something painful in Grace's chest. Grace's feet moved before her mind could counsel caution. Leave him alone. The boys turned, surprised, then burst into mocking laughter when they saw who'd spoken. "And who's going to stop us? You?" The tallest one looked her up and down with contempt, taking in her faded housemaid's uniform and worn sneakers. "Mind your business, housemaid. This doesn't concern you. I'm giving you something better." Grace reached into her purse with trembling fingers and pulled out her carefully saved $40, money she'd been saving for months from her tiny allowance. It was supposed to buy her a used SAT prep book she'd seen at a stall last week. Her first step toward maybe, someday, getting her GED and applying to community college. But looking at the boy's frightened face, she knew what she had to do. Some things mattered more than her dreams. Take this and leave him alone. The boys snatched the money and scattered into the crowd, already counting their unexpected gain and laughing about how easy it had been. The little boy looked up at Grace with tear-filled eyes as she helped him gather his scattered coins, counting them carefully to make sure none had been lost in the scuffle. "Thank you, sister," he whispered, his voice so small and grateful it made her throat tight. Grace used her remaining money to buy him a hot dog and orange juice from a nearby vendor, watching as he ate hungrily, like he hadn't had a real meal in days. She knew she'd face Patricia's wrath for coming home without the full grocery list. But some things mattered more than avoiding punishment. "That was kind of you." Grace spun around to find a tall man in jeans and a Columbia University hoodie watching her with warm, intense eyes. There was something oddly familiar about his face, something that made her heart skip, but she'd never seen him before. He was handsome in a way that made her suddenly conscious of her faded uniform and the hole in her left sneaker. "It was nothing," she murmured, suddenly self-conscious, looking down at her feet. It was everything to that child. He smiled, and it transformed his serious face entirely, making him look younger, more approachable, almost boyish. "I'm Alex. And you are?" "Grace." She hesitated, waiting for the usual questions about her family, her background, the questions that always led to pity or contempt or both. But he just smiled again, warmer this time. "Grace, it suits you perfectly." They talked while she finished her shopping, Alex asking questions about her life with genuine interest that felt foreign to her. He didn't talk down to her or look at her uniform with disdain. He listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words mattered, as if she mattered. She found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her dreams of finishing school someday, of becoming a teacher so she could help children like that little boy, of having a family who actually wanted her, who chose her not out of obligation or charity, but out of love. "Why do you want to be a teacher?" he asked, helping her carry her basket through the crowded market, weaving between stalls, selling fresh vegetables and homemade bread. "Because every child deserves to know they matter," Grace said quietly, surprised by her own honesty. "That they have potential regardless of where they started. I never had anyone tell me that growing up. I want to be that person for other children. I want them to know that where you start doesn't determine where you finish." Alex stopped walking and looked at her with such intensity that she felt her cheeks grow warm. "Why are you kind to everyone except yourself?" he asked quietly. The question caught her completely off guard. No one had ever asked her something like that before. No one had ever noticed. Before she could find an answer, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, completely out of place among the market vendors and Saturday shoppers. A man in a dark suit stepped out, speaking urgently into a phone. "Sir, we need to leave. Your schedule..." Alex looked reluctant, almost frustrated, his jaw tightening. "I have to go. But Grace, don't give up on those dreams. Promise me." "I promise," she whispered. not understanding why this stranger's opinion mattered so much to her, why his words felt like they might actually be true. As the SUV drove away, Grace stood holding her half-empty basket, watching until it disappeared into Manhattan traffic. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just shifted in some imperceptible but profound way. Like the earth had tilted slightly on its axis, and everything would be different now. Though she couldn't explain how or why. She didn't know that the man she'd just met was Alexander Kingsley, heir to a billion-dollar empire. She didn't know that he was driving away thinking about her smile, her kindness, her dreams, and the strange pull he felt toward this housemaid who gave away her last money to feed a hungry child. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen something worth knowing. The announcement blared from every television screen and news site across New York 3 days later. Alexander Kingsley was to choose a partner within 3 months, and the Kingsley Foundation would be hosting a series of charity galas for eligible young women from respectable families. In the Hartwell mansion, chaos erupted like a bomb had gone off. "This is it, Madison," Patricia shrieked with excitement, her voice carrying through every room of the 5-story townhouse. "This is your chance to marry into the Kingsley dynasty. We'll get you the best dresses, the best makeup artists, the best trainers, the best of everything. You're going to be the next Mrs. Kingsley." Madison squealed, already imagining herself on Alexander's arm, already practicing her smile for the cameras, already planning which designer would make her wedding dress. "Mama, do you think he'll like me?" "Like you? He'll love you, darling. You're beautiful, educated, from a good family. You're everything a Kingsley could want in a wife." Grace scrubbed the bathroom tiles harder, trying to ignore the celebration happening downstairs, trying to quiet the strange heaviness in her chest that felt suspiciously like disappointment. She told herself it was just exhaustion, not heartbreak. What did it matter to her who Alexander Kingsley married? Men like that didn't marry housemaids. Fairy tales weren't real. Cinderella was just a story. But the face of the kind stranger from the market kept floating into her mind. Alex. She'd spent the past 3 days thinking about him more than she cared to admit, wondering if she'd ever see him again, if he'd meant any of the encouraging things he'd said, or if he'd just been kind the way people are sometimes kind to stray dogs. A momentary compassion that meant nothing beyond the moment. "Grace!" Patricia's screech echoed up, the stairs sharp enough to make her flinch and drop her scrub brush. "Get down here now!" Grace abandoned her cleaning and hurried downstairs, her heart already racing with anxiety. When Patricia used that tone, punishment usually followed like thunder after lightning. She found the entire household assembled in the living room, surrounded by shopping bags, fabric samples, and glossy magazines showing society weddings. The television played footage of Alexander Kingsley on repeat, at charity events, at business conferences, at political fundraisers, always looking composed and distant and impossibly handsome. Grace's heart stopped. The man on the screen was Alex, her Alex from the market. Except he wasn't hers, and he wasn't just Alex. He was Alexander Kingsley, heir to a billion-dollar empire, one of the most eligible bachelors in America. A man so far above her station, they might as well exist on different planets. The stranger who'd asked about her dreams, who'd carried her grocery basket, who'd looked at her like she mattered, was practically royalty. "For the next 3 months, your only job is making sure Madison looks perfect," Patricia announced, oblivious to Grace's shock, oblivious to the way Grace's world was crumbling. "You'll wake up at 4 a.m. to prepare her skin treatments. You'll steam and iron every outfit twice. You'll carry her bags at every event. You'll make sure her makeup is flawless, her hair is perfect, her shoes are polished. And if you mess up even once, you're out on the street sleeping in doorways again. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Grace whispered, unable to tear her eyes from the television screen, from Alex's face, from the impossible distance between who he really was and who she'd imagined he might be. Madison smirked from the couch, already imagining herself wearing the Kingsley diamonds, already planning how she'd redecorate their penthouse. "Don't worry, Grace. When I'm Mrs. Kingsley, maybe I'll let you clean our apartment. At least then you'll have moved up in the world." Her friends laughed, the sound cruel and casual, like Grace was just part of the furniture, something to use and mock in equal measure. That night, alone in her tiny room behind the kitchen, Grace let herself cry for the first time in months. Not because of Madison's cruelty, she was used to that. Not because of Patricia's threats, those were nothing new. But because for one brief, shining moment in that market, a stranger had made her feel like she mattered, like her dreams were valid, like she was worth listening to. And now she knew it had all been impossible from the start. He was a billionaire. She was an orphan housemaid. They existed in different worlds, separated by an unbridgeable chasm of wealth and status and everything that mattered in New York society. Whatever kindness he'd shown her had been just that. Kindness. Nothing more. Nothing that could ever lead anywhere. Nothing that could ever be real. She clutched her thin pillow and tried not to think about his smile, his questions, the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, someone worth remembering. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, in a penthouse across the city, Marcus was presenting Alexander with a full report. Grace Morrison, age 19, orphan, housemaid to the Hartwell family. Found as an infant at St. Catherine's Church in Brooklyn. No known family, no prospects. And Alexander was staring at her photo with an expression that made Marcus very, very nervous. "Sir, you understand that a girl like this, from her background, it would be impossible. The board would never accept—" "I didn't ask for your opinion on what's possible, Marcus," Alexander interrupted quietly, his eyes never leaving Grace's photograph. "I asked you to find out who she is." Marcus fell silent, recognizing the tone. It was the same tone Alexander's father had used when he'd announced he would marry. Alexander's mother, despite her working-class background, despite the board's objections, despite everything. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. And while you're at it, tell us what city you're watching from, what time it is, where you are, and what do you think will happen. We love knowing our True Spark Stories family is spread across the world. The Kingsley men, it seemed, had a habit of making impossible choices. And Marcus had a sinking feeling that Alexander was about to make one now. Grace sat in the car outside the Plaza Hotel 2 weeks later, her stomach growling as she watched New York's elite stream into the charity gala in designer gowns and expensive jewelry. Patricia had made her skip breakfast and lunch to help Madison prepare for this moment. And now she was expected to wait in the parking garage for hours in case Madison needed anything. Through the car window, she could see the glittering lights of the ballroom entrance. Hear the faint music drifting out. See the flash of cameras as celebrities and socialites arrived. She wondered if Alexander, was inside. She'd spent 2 weeks trying not to think about him, trying to convince herself that the connection she'd felt in the market had been one-sided, imaginary, the desperate fantasy of a lonely girl who should have known better. She was nearly asleep, her head resting against the window, when the car door flew open so violently she almost fell out onto the concrete. Madison stood there, her face purple with rage, her designer gown covered in brown coffee stains. "Some idiot bumped into me in the bathroom, and I fell against the counter," she shrieked, her voice shrill enough to echo through the parking garage. "The gala starts in 10 minutes, and I look like trash. I'm so sorry, but what can I—" "Switch clothes with me, now." Grace's eyes widened in shock. "But Madison, I can't wear your—" "Do it now, or I swear to God you'll be sleeping on the street tonight." Madison's eyes were wild with desperation and fury. "Do you hear me? On the street!" Madison was already yanking at the zipper of her gown, not caring that they were in a parking garage where anyone could see, not caring about anything except getting into clean clothes before she missed her chance with Alexander Kingsley. Grace's hands trembled as she complied, knowing resistance was futile, knowing she had no choice, knowing this was just another humiliation in a long line of them. 5 minutes later, she stood in the plaza bathroom wearing Madison's stunning emerald Vera Wang gown, silk and crystals that probably cost $20,000. The dress fit her perfectly, almost as if it had been made for her body, hugging her curves in ways that made her look like someone else entirely. For one moment, looking at her reflection in the gold-framed mirror, Grace let herself imagine she was someone else. Someone who belonged in a dress like this. Someone who could walk into that ballroom and not feel like an imposter. Someone worthy of a man like Alexander Kingsley. Madison, now wearing Grace's simple black uniform, had stormed off to sit in the car, refusing to be seen in such rags. "Stay in the bathroom until I text you," she'd commanded. "Don't you dare let anyone see you in my dress, or you'll regret it for the rest of your miserable life." "I'll just wait here until she's ready to leave," Grace whispered to herself, smoothing down the silk nervously, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. But fate had other plans. A large group of guests pushed into the bathroom, their laughter and chatter forcing Grace out into the corridor. She tried to find a quiet corner, somewhere she could make herself invisible. But another wave of guests swept her along like a current, carrying her right through the massive doors and into the main ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. An orchestra played softly in the corner, the music elegant and refined. Everywhere she looked, she saw wealth and power. Senators, CEOs, celebrities, foreign dignitaries, all gathered to celebrate charity while drinking champagne that cost more than her monthly salary. And standing at the center of it all, shaking hands with a Supreme Court justice, was Alex. Except he wasn't Alex. He was Alexander Kingsley, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than she'd earn in a year, looking every inch the billionaire heir, the future of a dynasty. Grace's heart stopped. She needed to leave. Now. Before anyone noticed her. Before she caused another disaster. Before she humiliated herself and destroyed what little dignity she had left. She turned to flee, her only thought to get back to the parking garage, to safety, to invisibility. But it was too late. His eyes had found her across the crowded room, and the look of recognition and joy that crossed his face made several heads turn to see what had caught Alexander Kingsley's attention. The conversations around him faltered. People stared. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like wind through grass, spreading faster than fire. Alexander didn't seem to notice or care. He crossed the ballroom floor as if drawn by an invisible string, ignoring the gasps and whispers, ignoring his mother's sharp intake of breath from across the room, ignoring the advisor who tried to grab his arm. He stopped directly in front of Grace, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. Then, with a slight bow that sent shockwaves through the watching crowd, he extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" The room went completely silent. The orchestra stopped playing mid-note. Every eye turned to stare at the unknown girl in the emerald dress, standing frozen before New York's most eligible bachelor, her face a mixture of terror and disbelief. Somewhere in this crowd, Patricia's friend gasped in recognition. Isn't that the Hartwell's housemaid?" The whisper spread like wildfire through the ballroom. Grace heard it, felt the weight of hundreds of judging eyes, knew she should run, should apologize, should disappear before she made everything worse. But Alexander's hand remained extended, his eyes never leaving her face. And somehow, despite every logical thought screaming at her to flee, Grace found herself placing her trembling hand in his. As he led her onto the dance floor and the orchestra started again, she heard the first cruel laugh, then another. Within seconds, the room buzzed with mockery, barely concealed behind expensive jewelry and practiced smiles. But Alexander didn't seem to hear any of it. He only heard the music, only saw Grace's face, only felt the rightness of this moment, even as New York society began tearing her reputation to shreds around them. "I know who you are," he said softly as they moved across the floor. "I've known since the market, Grace. You're the most real person I've ever met." The video went viral within hours. Someone had recorded the entire dance on their phone, and by dawn, it had been shared millions of times across every social media platform. "Billionaire dances with nobody housemaid. Is this our future, Mrs. Kingsley?" The comment sections were cesspools of cruelty that made Grace physically ill when she read them on Madison's old phone. Who does this girl think she is? Gold digger alert. Someone protect this man from social climbers. She probably planned the whole thing. By morning, Grace's face was everywhere. On gossip blogs, on morning talk shows where hosts debated whether Alexander had been bewitched or was simply naive. On social media where strangers who'd never met her tore apart her character with gleeful cruelty. New York society had rendered its verdict. She was a calculating opportunist, a social climber, a conniving orphan who'd somehow tricked the billionaire heir. Patricia's fury was volcanic. She dragged Grace from her room at dawn, screaming loud enough to wake the entire block. "You've humiliated this family," she shrieked, pulling Grace by her hair across the floor. Madison was supposed to catch his attention, not you, you scheming witch. Grace tried to explain that she hadn't planned any of it, that Alexander had approached her, but Patricia wasn't interested in truth. Her hand connected with Grace's face once, twice, 3 times. The metallic taste of blood filled Grace's mouth. "You're locked in here until I decide what to do with you." Patricia dragged her to the servants' quarters and slammed the door. The lock clicked with terrible finality. But Patricia didn't know that Alexander Kingsley was already making plans. He'd called Columbia University admissions that morning. "I need you to prepare a full scholarship for a student. Grace Morrison. Full tuition, books, housing, allowance. Everything she needs to succeed. Anonymous donor. Make sure she gets the letter next week." And across town, his mother Victoria was sitting in Father Thomas's office at St. Catherine's Church, staring at a golden locket with shaking hands. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, all color draining from her face. "It was around Grace's neck when she was left here, 19 years ago." Victoria's legs buckled. Father Thomas caught her before she collapsed. "Tell me everything," she commanded through tears. Tell me everything about that night. Father Thomas explained carefully. A rainy evening in March, almost 20 years ago. A dark luxury car dropping off a bundle on the church steps. A baby girl, maybe a few days old, healthy, crying. And around her tiny neck, this golden locket. They told me my baby died. Victoria choked out between sobs. I was 19, pregnant, in love with a man my family said was beneath me. When I got pregnant, they were furious. They sent me to a private clinic upstate, wouldn't let Raymond come. I gave birth alone, and they told me she was stillborn, that it was God's will, that I needed to forget and marry someone appropriate. Her hands covered her face. But she wasn't dead. My family took her and abandoned her like trash, and I've spent 20 years mourning a child who was alive all along. 20 years while she suffered. We need to be certain, Father Thomas said gently. The DNA results came back a week later. Victoria sat alone in her penthouse, holding the envelope with trembling hands. She already knew the truth. A mother's heart had told her the moment she'd seen that locket. But she opened it anyway. 99.9% probability of maternal match. Grace Morrison was Grace Kingsley, her daughter. The baby she'd mourned for 2 decades had been alive all along, suffering while her mother lived in luxury just miles away. But there was a bigger problem. Alexander had just told her he planned to propose to Grace at the Foundation Gala in 3 days. "Mother, I love her," he'd said that morning. "I don't care about her status or what anyone thinks. I'm going to ask her to marry me. And if you won't accept her, I'll give up everything." Victoria had spent the week secretly watching Grace from tinted car windows, seeing herself reflected in every gesture, every expression. The same dark eyes, the same graceful movements, the same stubborn dignity despite cruelty. How had she not seen it before? Now, at the Foundation Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with all of New York's elite gathered, the moment had come. Alexander stepped onto the platform. "Tonight, I want to talk about what makes a person truly noble. For weeks, I've been told that status determines worth, that bloodline determines value. But I've learned something different." He stepped down, walking toward Grace in her corner. "I've learned that nobility isn't about birth. It's about character. It's about kindness when you have nothing to gain. Grace under cruelty. Dreaming when the world tells you you're worthless." He stopped in front of her. The entire room gasped. "Grace Morrison, you are the noblest person I've ever met. And I don't care what anyone says." He knelt. "Stop!" Victoria's voice rang out like a bell. She swept forward, tears streaming down her face, and the room watched in stunned confusion as she fell to her knees beside her son. "Please," she whispered, reaching for Grace's hands. "Please forgive me. Your Grace, I don't understand. 19 years ago, I gave birth to a daughter." Victoria's voice broke. "My family told me she died. But she didn't die. They took her and abandoned her at St. Catherine's. With this." She held up the locket. Grace's hand flew to her throat. "That's because you are my daughter. The DNA test confirmed it. Grace, you're not an orphan. You're my child. You're Grace Kingsley." The room erupted in gasps. Victoria's next words fell like bombs. "You're Alexander's sister." The word sister echoed through the silent hall. Alexander went completely white, understanding flooding his face. Grace swayed, unable to breathe. "All this time you've been suffering while I lived in luxury, not knowing." Victoria sobbed. "You've been beaten, mocked, called worthless when you're a princess by birth. Can you ever forgive me? Grace couldn't speak. The woman kneeling before her was her mother. The man who'd shown her kindness was her brother. Alexander's face showed devastated but clear understanding. I felt it, he whispered. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it. Like you were supposed to be part of my life. Like I was supposed to protect you. Not romantic love, something deeper. Soul recognizing blood. You didn't know, Grace finally whispered to Victoria. How can I forgive you for something you didn't know? But you suffered. Grace's voice grew stronger. And now I'm found. I spent 19 years believing I was nobody, that I had no family, no worth. But I was never nobody, was I? I was always your daughter. I always mattered. The world just couldn't see it. Victoria pulled Grace into her arms, and mother and daughter wept together. Alexander joined the embrace. For the first time in her life, Grace understood what it felt like to belong. Not because of what she'd gained, but because of what had always been true. She'd never been worthless. She'd never been unwanted. She was just lost. And now finally, she was home. If Grace's story touched your heart, it's because somewhere inside, you know this truth. Your worth was never determined by how others treated you. Like Grace, you were always valuable. The world just hadn't recognized it yet. Don't let anyone make you feel worthless. Your story isn't over. Subscribe to True Spark Stories for more incredible true stories that reveal the extraordinary in ordinary lives. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest, and what's your honest opinion on this story. Till next time.